Hey there, Pearlside Small Group Leaders. Thank you for joining us for another Small Group Leaders podcast where we help you to prepare as you lead your small groups. Pastor Billy here, joined by the one and only Pastor Wade in...
Yes, sir.
In the flesh, in the house. And we're diving into this week's discussion, a brand new series entitled Built Different. Because as the children of God, we're called to be built different. Amen. But before we do that, I just want to say a really quick thank you to all of you leaders.
Mahalo.
Because, for participating with us in our Possessing the Land campaign. And as you heard on Sunday, we've crashed the $1 million mark in less than a month.
Wow.
And that's all of you, your faith, your generosity, and your leadership. I know you've been having conversations, shepherding people, answering questions. So thank you, because this really is about leaving a lasting legacy and planting churches locally, nationally, and globally. And so it's not about us here. It's really about the mission of God for Pearlside to the nations. Right. And so thank you for your leadership, your faith, your participation.
Yeah, and this is a one church thing. You know, we have our main campus. This is a big effort here, but all the congregations, all the campuses are looking at this, possessing the land as a one church effort. And so we got to continue on. We're pressing on towards the goal of 3 million Amen. By August, and God is going to do it through us.
Amen to that. I believe that, and this really is about lives being touched around the world through our church. And I'm just amazed, even as we were reflecting in the last month, the different videos that we produced and just what God's done in the last 30 years through us is really remarkable. And I just think about what God's going to do in the next 30 and beyond. And long after we're gone, we'll have this land, and people who come up after us will be doing the same thing until Jesus comes back. Amen. And so Absolutely. That's exciting. So thank you again, leaders. And you can continue to give, obviously, and lead people that way. So thank you. Amen. Well, we are diving into our new series, again, Built Different. And we're starting off here by looking at this passage in Matthew chapter 7, where Jesus talks about the storms that are inevitably going to come, but how we can have our foundation on the rock. And I want to highlight a couple of things before we discuss here. First of all, is that this whole passage starts off with Jesus saying in Matthew chapter 7:21, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only who does the will of my Father who is in heaven." And then he goes into the fact that there are going to be storms. The rain came down and the streams rose and beat against the house. But everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a man who built his house on the rock. But everyone who doesn't is like someone who built their house on the sand. And then if it's built on the wrong foundation, there's going to come a crash. And there's a lot of different things that we talked about this weekend in all of our locations. But a few thoughts here in the discussion. First of all, right words without connection cannot save us. So these people that said, "Lord, Lord," they said the right words, but they didn't have the right heart. They didn't have the right relationship. And right works without right relationship won't save us or sustain us either, right? They did the right works. They drove out demons. They prophesied. They performed miracles. So we know it's not the words and it's not the works that save us, but it's really about the relationship. And the third thought here is what was missing wasn't activity, but it was intimacy. He said, "I never knew you." There was never that personal relationship with him. And that's why when the storms come, it reveals really where our relationship with Jesus is at. It reveals our foundations, right? He says, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice. So there's this connection between what we believe and what we do, and that's indicative of relationship. It's like building our house on the rock. And when the storms come, if we're built on the right foundation, we'll stand. But if we're not built on the right foundation, Jesus and his word, we're going to crash. And so storms reveal the strength of our foundations. It reveals what our foundations are. And I think that's so important. There's so many things that we can talk about here. But as you reflect on the main thought, scriptures in the weekend sermon, what is one truth or insight that stands out to you? Pastor Wade, what goes in your mind?
And I just, I encourage those that are processing this word that storms are going to come on the horizon. You might be in one. You might have just come out of a storm, right. Or you might be preparing for one and coming closer to God, coming closer to Christ. We can expect that those turbulent times will come. And so what it does is reveals what our foundations look like.
Right.
And we want to make sure that we don't have any faulty foundations. When you build a house, you kind of want to survey the land to make sure there's no fault lines that you're building on, because any kind of shake with and I'm not a scientist by any means. That's not my realm. But the plate tectonics underneath, if you're on the wrong fault line, the walls are going to crack. And those cracks are indicators that there's something wrong with the foundation. And for our lives, we can, when storms do come in, it'll expose those cracks that we should deal with, and we have to go to the root.
Yeah, no, that's so true. I mean, when you buy a house, I mean, it can look nice on the outside, but you got to see what's under the surface. That's why you hire all those inspectors and all those things. And a lot of times I think what we try to do is we just try to cover up those fault lines and those cracks, try to make it look
put
good.
Plaster on top.
Yeah,
right?
exactly,
just
right?
Slap on a surface, the cracks, but they're still there.
And they're not going to go away. They're just going to keep getting worse, right? Or you brought up, if you have ants in your house and all you do is, kill the ants, you smash them one at a time and you don't get to the nest,
right? They're
going to come back. And
they probably usually come through those little pukas.
That's right.
In the cracks.
And pukas in the cracks. There you go.
Yeah.
But the reality is, I think spiritually, as you said, for our lives, it's the same thing, right? If we have faulty foundations and we don't fix those, we can slap on, activity or busyness or good works. But if the foundation isn't solid, eventually it's going to be exposed and revealed again. And I think that's what storms do, right? That's what this passage is telling us, that when the storms came, it revealed whose house was built on sand and whose house was built on the rock.
Right.
It reveals your foundations. And I think that's huge, because a lot of times when we go through storms, we blame the storm. You know what I mean? Like, we're like, if I didn't go through that, then I would be fine. Or or we blame our spouse. If I was married to a better person, then I wouldn't be going through this. Or my boss was better than I would. But the reality is, it just reveals your foundation.
Right.
And if we have a right foundation, then no matter what the external circumstance is, we should be able to stand and thrive, even with a bad boss or a less than perfect spouse. All of us are. Circumstances shouldn't change. I mean, they're going to change, but if our foundation is solid, then we'll endure whatever it is.
Right.
And I think that's huge, right?
And I think the clearly laid out throughout all the different points that we're going to wrestle with in our small groups this week is that relationship with Jesus, who is the rock, is the foundation.
Yes.
And it's back to the basics. It's like basic, fundamental, foundational things is spending time with Jesus, spending time with the Lord. And some of you are brand new, and this is easy for you. Like, this is like the honeymoon stage, and you're all excited. You're in your devotions. If you've been walking with the Lord for a while, sometimes this basic, fundamental, foundational building piece is something that we skip out on. And so we want to encourage everyone, go back to your first love.
That's good.
Keep falling in love with Jesus. Keep chasing after him. Intimacy is connection. And I think just building on those devotional connection points with a relational God, which is Jesus, is building a solid foundation.
Amen. I mean, that goes right into the next question in the discussion guide. How does it make you feel, to hear Jesus say, "I never knew you," right? What does that reveal about the kind of relationship he wants with us? I mean, none of us want to hear that. I mean, that's probably the worst thing you want to hear when you finally die and stand before the Lord. Oh, I never knew you, right? But you think about the guys that he said it to. They had performed miracles. They had cast out demons. They had declared with their mouths, "Lord, Lord," right? But then the heart relationship, as you brought out, wasn't there. And I think they were shocked.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Well, they did the works part, right?
Yeah.
So they did the servant part. But the one that is the preface is, "Well done, good and faithful." And so that comes from connection. That comes from discipline. That comes from coming before the Father, laying out your heart, and then doing the works out of a response of that relationship and connection.
That is so true. So we, as you said, the fundamental, let's get back down to the basics. Let's examine our foundations. And one of the ways that is when the stuff hits the fan, the storms come in your life, how do you respond? Are we responding with turning to Jesus in prayer? Are we responding with coping mechanisms, alcohol, drugs, sex, the common stuff, or just avoidance, distraction, the different things that we do? Or are we coming to him? Because if he really is Lord, then we should go to him first. We should go to prayer first. We should go to small group and process those things. And I think the way that we respond to storms, do we freak out, or do we turn to him? It reveals what our foundation is in. And I think in our discussions in small group, that's a great question to ask. How do you respond, when you go through storms? Do you freak or do you turn to the Lord, right?
Well, what's fresh in our minds from last week's message is Paul's on a shore, shipwreck, storm, snake.
Yep.
And what does he do?
It bite him.
It bite him. He shook it off.
Yeah,
That's perspective.
that's right.
He had all of those things against him, and here's what shows about his foundation and his relationship with God. He shook it off.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's so huge, man. So that leads to then to the third question you can talk about, right? Think back to a recent storm or hardship that you went through. What did it reveal about your foundation? Did it drive you closer to Jesus or expose an area that needs rebuilding? So think about a recent storm. What did it reveal? So Paul, in that storm, it revealed his foundation, right? He had complete trust because he knew he was called to go to Rome. When he landed on the beach, got bit by this thing, he was able to shake it off because he knew, I can't die here. God told me I'm going to Rome, and it revealed his foundation. What about us? You know, as we share about these things, what does it reveal, right? What do you do when you face a storm? You know, how do you respond? Again, reveals your foundations. Any thoughts on that, Wade?
It's back to, so keeping it back to the basics and growing in your faith and building, and in your small groups being transparent and telling them, look, the storm's like, it's like hitting now, and I'm doing everything I can, and I'm praying and I'm believing. And sometimes you just can't do it by yourself. You have to have people to stand with you. And so that takes humility, because there's a lot of people that say, I can handle. And God's like, this is something that you cannot handle by yourself. And so back to the same illustration. Paul was with prisoners. Paul had people with him. He wasn't on the shipwreck by himself. And God still used him in that little pit stop before Rome.
Yeah, and I want to add too that the way that you respond to storms reveals your growth as well. I was just in a small group this morning, in fact, and just seeing the way that some of the guys, they're going through some storms, but the way that they're responding with faith, it's different from this year and just 12 months ago, and you can see, wow, the storm seems like it got stronger, but so did you. You know what I mean? You're more resilient now.
That's so good.
Yeah. And I think that's how we can kind of not measure our growth. We don't want to measure, but just kind of see, hey, am I growing? Like that would have crushed me 12 months ago.
In a different season.
Yeah. 12 months ago, that would have destroyed me. But now I see a different perspective. And one of the things the guys are saying is, I'm so thankful for the small group, thankful for all of you, and just to have the Lord in the midst of this. And I think that's a indicator that we're growing. We're not being crushed by the storms like we used to be in the past. And all of us will go through them, and how we respond, I think, reveals a lot. And the last thought here, or last question in the discussion guide, and again, choose the ones that best apply to your group. You don't have to go through all of them, but what is one area of your life where God is calling you to obey this week? What practical step will you take to respond with faith? Pastor Wade, any thoughts on that?
What practical step will you respond in faith? I think just getting up in the morning and turning off silencing your cell phone before you getting into any kind of small group or devotion.
There you go. That's right. To remain a spirit-focused environment.
Are you grabbing onto the word? Are you grabbing onto your cell phone first thing in the morning? And so the first thing I'm going to do,
I can tell it's a spam
call.
Don't
spam.
Answer it. Don't answer it. It's a distraction from the enemy.
Spam cooker. If you guys don't know, my phone rang, and it wasn't on vibrate, and I just pray that it never happens when I speak on a Sunday morning. Amen. And I think somebody will actually try to call me to test me this week if my phone was on ring. But yeah, just the daily disciplines and waking up, making a choice. There's so many choices. There's so many things that you can do. You can scroll. You can let the feed on your social media feed you, or you can get before the Father and have that connection point where he can say, I know you intimately, like a husband knows his wife, and vice versa.
It's interesting. I was just thinking as you're talking about that sometimes when I'm stressed or I'm going through facing a storm, I just want to avoid it. I just want to avoid it. I don't want to think about it. So then you just scroll, right? That just to distract yourself, and how that's just not a great response. You know what I mean? To avoid the storm, right? But rather, as you said, going to the Word, going to prayer, right? Seeking Him and His Word in the middle of that is probably one of the best faith steps we can take when we're facing a storm, instead of avoidance or coping or whatever, like really going to Him. So, no, it's great. Guys, this will lead to a really, I think, robust discussion this week, because everyone's facing storms. I had a lot of feedback from this past weekend's message, just, because it's real. We face storms as we're going through life, but how do we respond to it? And so this message, I think, will help us, or this discussion will help us to take it a little bit further. And again, it's all about coming back to intimacy with Christ. Like we try to cope with our problems with works and busyness and stuff, but the reality is it's intimacy. That's why Jesus said, I never knew you. It's about that relationship. And what happened? What do we go to when we face storms? What does it reveal about our foundation? And may we bring our foundation back to the rock of Jesus Christ.
And just as leaders, having eyes to see not just your storms, but be vigilant, because there's people that are going through some stuff. There are people that are going through some storms, and so they might be far from God, and you have the answer, you have the key, and we would just have to be very, very vigilant and looking for the harvest. The harvest is near. It could be it could be a coworker, could be in your family circles. Look, keep your eyes open for really those connecting points with people. I
was really encouraged too in that small group that, a lot of the guys are going through stuff. And one of the things they're saying is we know it's partly because we're in this building campaign and the enemy's pushing back on all of us. And I was like, wow, that's a very, spiritually mature way to respond, and realizing, okay, this is par for the course, because our church is moving forward and they see themselves as part of the church. We're in this together. I was like, wow, that was great, awesome. And so but also to your point, Wade, I think knowing that people in our church are likely going to be experiencing pushback from the enemy while we're in this historic moment as a family together, that all the more we should be vigilant, praying for one another and encouraging one another. So let's make sure we take time to pray in our small groups this week in the areas of our lives where we are facing storms. Let's not just end it, but take time to really pray, meet people where they're at, minister to one another, and encourage one another so that we can persevere and make sure that we stand in the midst of this storm and are resilient. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. So thank you for all that you do, leaders. Appreciate you so much, and the way that you're standing for the men and women in your small groups and really making a difference in people's lives. You guys are on the front lines, and we so appreciate all of your leadership and efforts. And we know that God's going to continue to do great things in and through all of us, making a difference in the world around us. So thank you, leaders. Have great small groups this week, and we'll see you in small groups next week. God bless you all.
God bless you guys.